Alrighty, I'm good. Hello, my name's Michael DiMatteo. Does anyone else remember this big issue with the Confederate statues a couple years ago? I'm a big history guy myself. I love, looking at historical videos and documentaries and such. And there seems to be two sides to this issue. The idea that we should keep the statues up to remember our history, or we should remove the statues because we don't want to glorify the Confederacy. And I've done a lot of research, and I believe that the best course of action for the United States is to remove these statues out of the public eye and put these statues in the museums where they can be viewed within a proper context. Speaking of context, we're going to need a little bit about the Civil War / the statues themselves. So the Civil War is between 1861 and 1865. You can see the North in the blue, Confederacy in the gray down here. Obviously, we know the Union wins the war, and the Confederacy doesn't exist today. There were many causes of this Civil War. There's an article by NPS.gov. There's an article written by NPS.gov, and it states that, quote, "Today, most professional historians agree that slavery and the status of African Americans were at the heart of the crisis that plunged the U.S. into a civil war." And so many things, such as the states, northern and southern states, arguing for political power before the Civil War, the economics of slavery, of how much money people in the South made, and the more moral side of slavery in the North, and all these issues lead to the central point of slavery, which is the most important thing to remember. Now, there are many myths about the causes of the Civil War, including the Lost Cause, or the War of Northern Aggression, as they're called. And so these myths kind of put the Confederates in the best possible light and romanticizes the South. There was an article by the Encyclopedia of Virginia which talks about some of the major tenets, and it includes things such as the South seceding due to things like states' rights and taxation, and how the South actually had the better soldiers during the war. It was because the North had overwhelming resources, was the only reason they won. So it again kind of spins it in favor of the South and tries to make it, or the myth completely ignores the slavery as the cause of the Civil War, and it's very important to understand this. When it comes to the statues themselves, a lot of them were built in the late 1800s or early 1900s, according to an article on 538 by Ryan Best. And you can see some examples of some statues. You can see, like on this one right here, it talks about the United Daughters of the Confederacy. This one says it was erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy. And so who are these Daughters of the Confederacy? And this leads into my first major point, is that these statues should be removed because they teach incorrect history. The Daughters of the Confederacy were a lobbying group that started in 1894. You notice right when all these statues start coming up, the Daughters of the Confederacy show up. They were a lobbying group. They funded statues, and they believed heavily in this lost cause myth. They pushed this myth. Now, there's a YouTube historian by the name of Andrew Rakish. He's one of the people that I watched. And he made a video discussing this lost cause myth. The whole video is 21 minutes. I encourage you guys to watch it. I'm just going to show a little tidbit of the video here for you guys.
The people who put up the majority of Confederate monuments, such as the United Daughters of the Confederacy, related monument associations, Confederate Veterans Associations, and their children, are directly responsible for propagating the misinformation and outright fabrication that has for 150 years given white Americans a rosy, happy, sunshine and puppies view of the Confederacy. In short, the monument builders themselves wanted to erase history because they found it offensive. Many of you seem to be under the impression that the lost cause myth is not a myth, that it's a legitimate historical interpretation. The Civil War from the Southern point of view. I'm sorry to say that's just not the case. The tenets of the lost cause obfuscate and twist the truth, and the development of the myth is extremely...
So, again, it's important to understand that people who put up these statues wanted to lie to you about history and lie to you about the origins of the Civil War. And this goes to why they should be put into museums. All this information that I'm giving you in this speech right now could be given in a museum setting. Could give the context of these statues of the Civil War and the people who put up these statues pushing the lost cause myth. That's why I believe the statues shouldn't be completely taken down, because they do serve as a reminder to history. But it's important that we remember the real history. So what happens if we decide to do nothing and keep these statues up? There will be continued unrest. There will be many protests and riots and people trying to possibly take down statues, and you will have counter-protesters showing up to protect the statues, which leads to things like violence, which obviously is not a good thing. And people remember the famous Charlottesville incident that happened a couple years ago. That was due to this Confederate monuments, where counter-protesters showed up and people ended up being killed. So to conclude, these monuments and these statues of the Confederacy should be removed. They teach bad history, and they should be put into museums in order to show that. There are some things that we can do. Obviously, if this ever comes up in a conversation, you can tell your friends about this, which I doubt that's really going to happen. But what I would encourage is to make sure that our school system is properly teaching history, teaching the correct history, and not teaching these lost cause myths or these lies. And there's a saying that many people have heard, that the victors write the history, they write the history books, and 150 years later after the Civil War, I think it's about time they started putting some pen to paper. Thank you.